So now we have what should be a very interesting panel moderated by Louisa Kasdon, who is the founder and CEO of Let's Talk About Food, a Boston-based organization that creates events to engage the public and expands the conversation about our food system. A former owner of 3 restaurants, Louisa made the transition from preparing food to writing about food. She is a well-known journalist, contributing editor of the Boston Phoenix magazine, and the author of over 500 published pieces about food. So let's see what makes up the ideal panel.
So we spoke about this before. Let me just check that we have, that I've got the right order. And we agreed that Jennifer would start off? No. Okay. Becky would start off. Becky Goldberg, who's an attorney at the FDA in the Office of the Chief Counsel. And after Becky speaks, then Jennifer will speak. Jennifer is the Director of Legal Initiatives. She is the Director of Legal Initiatives at the Rudd Center at Yale. Okay. I'm such a loser. And our third speaker is Helen Falco, who's the Director of Nutrition and Health Policy at Coca-Cola. So I have asked each of them to think of an image, one slide, that would be sort of iconic for their presentation. So let us begin with Becky.
All right, I don't know if it's iconic, but, and that's not it. There it is. But yeah, so hi, I'm Becky Goldberg. As Louisa said, I'm a lawyer at FDA's Office of Chief Counsel, although I'm actually appearing here today in my personal capacity, not representing the agency. So whatever I say does not necessarily represent the agency's views, and I think that also means that I don't have to debate with Michael Jacobson the exact meaning of the word pathetic, but that's okay. But I am going to fulfill the role of the government lawyer a little bit in being a little bit of a killjoy on the panel, because the panel is supposed to be about the ideal food label, but I'm going to be focusing largely on the barriers that exist to achieving the ideal food label. But I want to start by saying that I don't mean to be discouraging. I think that this is a really dynamic area. Food labels change constantly. The laws and regulations that govern them change frequently, and there's a lot of interesting work to be done. But I do think for people who are interested in working in this area and pursuing their ideal food label, you do need to be aware of the tremendous amount of law that governs that space. And I find it a very interesting area. So I'll start. So the slide is a food label. And so I just wanted to start by going through it a little bit, because I think, as Professor Roberts said, you can view it as a battleground. I think it often makes sense to view it that way. But also what it is a highly regulated space, legally speaking. And frankly, that's one reason why this is a very interesting area for lawyers to be in my opinion. But so this food label, you can see on the right-hand side of the slide is the Nutrition Facts Panel, which is the result of a statute that Congress passed and regulations that FDA subsequently promulgated. So that's a very highly regulated part of the label. That's why that always appears the same. And the same goes for the ingredients, which in this picture are below. This picture, obviously, since it can't be done in 3 dimensions, but you guys are all familiar enough with food to know what's what. So the part that has the name of the product, Fiber 1, that's the front of pack. And as some of the speakers have already alluded to, that's a very hot space right now, what goes on the front of the package. So this product, I think, in the top right, it has those facts up front. That's an industry initiative. So even though it's very standardized, and I wouldn't be surprised if people assumed that it was the result of a law or a regulation, just like the Nutrient Facts Panel is, it is not. It was a consensus decision to start using that by a group of industry, two separate industry groups. That big check mark, the whole grains guaranteed, that's something that General Mills does themselves. That's their thing. I understand from their website that it indicates that the first ingredient of the product is a whole grain. And as some of the speakers have alluded to, there are also third parties that sometimes do things that can go on the front of the package, including, I think there's some third parties that are doing whole grain labeling. This product has an interesting claim. The 51%, and I can't quite read it from here, but I think it says of your daily value of fiber. I don't know if you can read it on there. It's interesting to me because that's a type, we would probably refer to that as a nutrient content claim, which is a specific regulated type of claim, but they chose not to take the more highly regulated path, which would have been to say high in fiber. When you see on the front of the package, if something says high in fiber, that has a very specific meaning under the law, again, as a result of a statute and regulations. It basically means 20% or more of the daily value, but it's actually a kind of complicated area. They didn't take that route. They just put the exact percentage up there. So that's interesting. And it's interesting, too, what's not on the label, one thing that caught my eye with respect to fiber is there are certain claims one can make about the connection between fiber and the possibility of a reduced risk of certain types of cancer. And for that type of claim, that's called a health claim. That's also a very highly regulated area. They're not making those claims on this label, but that's another type of thing that can happen. And all of these are just separate bodies of law that have a huge amount of, history, legislative history, and, agencies writing regulations with lengthy preambles and all kinds of stuff to learn about all these different sort of discrete areas. This is the sort of meat of what a lot of FDA lawyers do, is dealing with those types of laws and regulations. So, but what I wanted to touch on briefly and come back to probably during the discussion is I don't know if obstacles is the right word, but sort of the legal landscape when you're trying to create your ideal food label. So for example, in order for the FDA to require something like the Nutrient Fact Panel, that is a type of government-compelled speech. So there exists a body of First Amendment law that governs government-compelled speech. And when the FDA came out with that rule, or if they were to come out with a different version of it, or when Congress passes the statute, whenever government makes that decision to compel certain speech, the possibility exists that industry could, or a particular company could sue the agency and say, you're violating our First Amendment rights, by compelling speech. And there's a body of case law. I know a lot of people in the room are not lawyers, but I'll just say quickly, oftentimes compelled speech is analyzed under a case called Zouderer, in which case the disclosure requirement only needs to be reasonably related to the government's interest. There's different case law as to what that government interest can be. There was recently a very important case in the tobacco realm that FDA lost that had to do with mandatory disclosure, which I'd be happy to discuss afterwards if anyone's interested. But sometimes disclosures are analyzed under an intermediate level of scrutiny. The case there is Central Hudson. And that's the kind of typical commercial speech First Amendment doctrine. So for example, the main time when that comes up, I know that one thing that some people might want in their pursuit of the ideal food label is they might want to see certain types of claims come off of the label, claims that companies make about health benefits, that sort of thing. Well, if the government is going to try to remove claims from the food label, then that is a type of government suppression of speech. And so that also is a situation where the company can sue and say you're violating our First Amendment rights. And because it's commercial speech, the government can do a lot more than if it were political speech. But it still would be analyzed under the Central Hudson test, which is a fairly high level, and courts have been, I would say especially the DC Circuit, which is where a lot of this type of administrative law gets litigated, has been stricter and stricter in general in its interpretation of that doctrine and in terms of what it will let government do. Another interesting area a lot of you are probably familiar with is things like companies want to say that their product is GMO free, for example, or with milk that it's RBST free. Those sorts of things. There's been a lot of discussion. There's a lot of interesting law review articles on those sorts of topics. FDA has said various public things in guidance documents about the ways in which those claims could be misleading depending on the context. Basically, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, you can't make a claim that's false or misleading. and omission of information can also, or failure to provide context, can contribute to a claim being misleading. So there's a lot of interesting regulations around there. And I just wanted to mention one other sort of different kind of miscellaneous thing, but I thought people might be interested, just to give you more of a sense of the legal landscape and all the kinds of different issues that come into play. I know some of the previous speakers mentioned country of origin labeling, which is when, you know, the apple says product of Mexico or whatever on it. Well, recently the World Trade Organization issued a decision stating that certain parts of the United States country of origin label regulations with respect to meat were protectionist and were in violation of that organization's standards. And that's actually, I think the deadline for the United States to comply with that is coming up this spring, and that's not FDA, that's USDA dealing with that, but there's a lot of action around that. So that's just another example of the sort of thing that comes into play when you're trying to create the ideal food label. But it is, like I said, a really fascinating area to be in.
Can I have the clicker, please? Thanks. Hi, I'm Jennifer Pomeranz. Thank you for being here. I got the memo about one slide, but not about one image, so I have a few images. My little talk right now will be discussing sweetener. And I have 3 problems that I'm going to be addressing that have to do with sweetener and labeling. And all the products on my slide are in full compliance with the law. I'm not making any kind of statement about that. I'm saying where I think that the label should be. But I also want to say that I would defer to the science. So if my opinion turns out to be wrong according to the studies, I would defer to what the actual science says. If you do consumer surveys, I think that's actually the best way to find out what the best label should be. But with my research, this is where I would say. I would start with the fact that I'm very happy that the FDA said that they're going to be addressing added sugar on the nutrition facts panel. Right now, all we have is a total sugar requirement, which I believe really leaves consumers in the dark about certain products. And I'm specifically going to show you a couple products on this topic. So the first product is Minute Maid Fruit Punch. This has 3% juice, and the rest is added sugar. The next is Tropicana Twister. This has 10% juice, and the rest is added sugar. I think these products look very similar to a consumer, and they wouldn't have any way to calculate the amount of added sugar versus naturally occurring sugar in such a product. And then the next product is this Tropicana juice, which actually to me looks like 100% juice, but it's not. It's only 30% juice. And ironically, the one that has the most naturally occurring juice is actually the highest in total sugar. And so I respectfully disagree with Michael Jacobson, and I actually believe that total sugar should remain on the label and that we would have a subcategory of added sugar, the same we have as total fat with subcategories of other fat. I think total sugar is an important element of the nutrition facts panel, and removing it would end up in more consumer confusion, especially when products like this would have 0% juice. As an aside, I know that CSPA has a suggestion on how to deal with that, which would be adding more language to the panel, which I think was actually more confusing, and I would prefer to see specifically factual information about the sugar in the label. And also, if you took out total sugar, a lot of products that have both would end up looking like they have less sugar to consumers actually used to seeing total sugar on the label. So all of a sudden, there would be this drop in sugar on all the labels. And as an example, this Raisin Bran I chose because I think it's a really confusing product in terms of added sugar and naturally occurring sugar. Not only are the raisins naturally occurring sugar, but they put sugar on the raisins. And then if we are only looking at the carbohydrates versus the added sugar, we have flakes, which are carbohydrates, different types of carbohydrates. Then we have added sugar, and we have naturally occurring sugar. So in my opinion, I would say you would want all that information, total sugar and added sugar. Now, if it turns out the consumers would prefer to see naturally occurring sugar over added sugar, great. But I think both types of information should be on the label. My second area has to do with health and nutrition claims. Right now, the FDA regulations permit health claims on foods unless they have a disqualifying level of fat, saturated fat, sodium, and cholesterol. This list does not include added sugar or trans fat. So foods with added sugar and trans fat can have health claims. However, 85% of claims on labels are actually nutrient content claims, and that's what most people are used to seeing. Nutrient content claims can be placed on foods with those disqualifying levels as long as the manufacturer puts a little note that says, see the nutrition information. I'm not sure how effective that is, but that's one solution. But again, there's no disqualifying representation needed if it's high in added sugar or trans fat. The result is an enormous amount of products on store shelves, high in added sugar with what you see up there with a lot of nutrient content claims. And the nutrient content claims are especially on high sugar cereals that appeal to children. So a lot of times you'll have parents seeing in the supermarket, seeing with a child seeing the character, right? I didn't give a character box here, but you know, there's normal spokes characters. A child seeing a character on a box, the parent might not normally purchase such a product, but then they see the nutrient content claim and they're swayed. And in fact, studies out of the Rudd Center have shown that parents are swayed by these types of nutrient content claims. And specifically, the calcium and vitamin D claim, actually parents think that's a structure function claim, saying that you'll get strong bones. So clearly consumers are confused. And I think we need to rein in claims. I personally think that the disqualifying list should be added to with added sugar and trans fat, and it should actually be disqualifying for nutrient content claims. And then as you see this Baby Ruth, we have, this is the second candy bar I've seen that does have peanuts in it, and they're not fortifying the Baby Ruth, but they're actually telling you about the protein in the peanuts. But these are all because sugar is left out of all health and nutrition claim labeling problems. So that's number 2. And this one I think is slam dunk and the science is there, so this is for me my number 1. Now my third one is a little quiz for you. What do these 3 products have in common? Does anybody know? Yeah? No. Remember that we're doing sweeteners today. It's not the added sugar, but they do have added sugar. It's actually, all 3 have artificial sweeteners, and none of that is indicated on the front of these labels. So a survey also done by the Rudd Center shows that parents don't want their children eating artificial sweeteners. Yet, unless they study the nutrition ingredients list, they would have no way of knowing. And I have to tell you, I read some of these words for artificial sweeteners. I've never heard them before myself, and I wouldn't know them if I had seen them. The Sunny D has 3 artificial sweeteners: acesulfame potassium, sucralose, and neotame. Sucralose sounds kind of familiar. And then the Capri Sun has sucralose, and Lifetime Crunch cereal has polydextrose. I doubt that most consumers know these are artificial sweeteners and that they would ever expect that artificial sweeteners, in addition to added sugars, would be in products. So that's my final thing I would change on the package with respect to sweeteners. I would require a disclosure on the front of the package saying artificial sweeteners are present. Thank you.
Is it advance or read?
I think that's the side one.
There we go. Okay, Helen Falco from the Coca-Cola Company. And believe it or not, I am glad to be here today with you because I think we need to speak together. We need to share our views. So the first thing I wanted to bring is a little bit of history because I'm going to guess, maybe Michael knows this. Does anyone in the room recognize this right away? Yeah. This is Volume 2, January 6, 1993, the Federal Register, which led the way forward for mandatory nutrition labeling in the United States. This was before the days of the computer, so look at all the tabs. I've never had the heart to throw this away in 20 years. But 20 years later, now we need to know, we need to look at what's relevant for people today. And one of the biggest issues that's facing all of us is overweight and obesity and the related health issues that they're really serious topics and there aren't any simple solutions. We've got to look at this in a multidimensional way. We believe any progress in advancing workable solutions requires that we all work together, that we all talk together, and that we provide tools and actions, including the creativity to look at a new way to approach the nutrition label that will help people achieve a healthy weight and a better life altogether. So I want to give you a little bit of perspective about myself and why I'm going to talk about 3 principles that I believe are important. First of all, I've worked in this area for, it's kind of shocking to me, it's getting close to 30 years. 17 of those years were in the international arena. I'm aware that everyone in this room, we may not all agree on the steps that are necessary and that we have to take, but I hope that we can all come together as we have today. We can begin to share the views and the visions and see what the way forward is, so that we end up with a better informed and a better educated public. I work for Coca-Cola now, but during my career I've dealt with everything from tomato sauce to ice cream to powdered milk. My career has taken me through NLEA in the United States, through the nutrition and health claims regs in Europe, and through the revision of nutrition guidelines as part of Codex Alimentarius. That's an international standards setting group. Since 2005, I have really been active in the area of fact-based front-of-pack labeling. We call that FOP for short. It's too much to spell out. This has been in Europe, it's been in the United States, and in many other countries around the world. In Europe, I had the privilege to participate in a think tank organized by BEUC. That's the International Consumer Organization. We all have to talk together to understand and find solutions. I also had the privilege of chairing the industry committee that introduced guideline daily amounts. Those are GDAs, basically that single calorie symbol that you're seeing on the front of many packages now. These combined experiences have convinced me of 3 basic principles which have guided me, are fundamental to my company, and are really shared by food industry colleagues all over the world. The first principle is that fact-based nutrition labeling is an important tool that can help facilitate informed choice to meet individual needs. The second principle is less is more. The nutrition panel needs to provide as much information as necessary, but it shouldn't take a college semester to understand it. And the third principle is that education is a key element to ensure that nutrition labeling is understood and that it is used. Information doesn't become knowledge until there is understanding. So let's look at fact-based. I'm going to guess that there are about 120, 125 people here in the room. And each one of us has different energy requirements, different calorie requirements, different nutrient requirements. Whether it's our sex, our weight, our age, our degree of physical activity, what I need and what you need can be very different. Fact-based nutrition labeling on both the back of the pack in forms of the standard nutrition label and on the front can be important tools. They can empower people with the information and the knowledge to make informed dietary choices. The fundamental principle of a fact-based approach is that all foods can fit in an active, healthy lifestyle. It's a sensible, balanced diet and regular physical activity. That's the principle behind it. Fact-based approach considers calorie and nutrient needs across the total diet and the contributions that individual foods make to meeting those needs. A fact-based approach doesn't brand some foods or ingredients or nutrients as good or bad, but it does recognize that all calories count when it comes to weight management, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what food or beverage, they all count. So at Coca-Cola, we have a very strong commitment to informing with transparency. You can see that on the slide. We have a publicly stated global policy that requires back-of-pack nutrition labeling and front-of-pack calorie labeling, or kilocalories or kilojoules, wherever you are in the world, on our more than 3,500 products. And we've taken leadership roles in making sure this happens all over the world. Now, what about less is more? Many of us in this room have spent years earning our nutrition degrees and advanced degrees, and then years more honing our skills so that we could turn this into actionable advice. The average person doesn't have this. People get their nutrition information from social and traditional media, from friends and family, from their health practitioners. It's no longer, very sadly, no longer part of the school curriculum. And people are leading busier and busier lives. You race through the grocery store with your shopping list in hand. You haven't got time to turn those labels around. So as we begin to think about a label that will meet today's needs, and I think we are at that thinking stage, we need to look at a label that will help tackle that issue of obesity. We need to think about a label that can be understood with minimal nutrition background, and a label that fits with people's busy lives. So we need to look at a label that is simple, that's straightforward, and that can be readily used in helping to plan a healthful diet. Within that construct, we propose that calorie information is foremost, both on the back of the pack and on the front of the pack. Other information should focus on those nutrients that are most important to good health. And we've got a lot to think about and look at the science in deciding what those other nutrients should be. Additional information can be provided, but let's put it on websites. Let's put it in other forms so that we are not overloading the consumer. Now finally, on education, it's a bridge that translates information to knowledge. There's not one of us in this room that touched our first computer or drove our first car without some amount of education. And it's like that for the nutrition facts label, for all of the nutrition label. This was a big miss in the last 20 years. We put a lot of effort, everyone, into getting those nutrition facts on the label, but the time and effort and money was just not there for the robust education that was needed. So education is needed to motivate, to empower people so that they can make those informed choices that are right for the individual. At Coca-Cola, we are strongly committed to executing and educating around choice. Here in the United States, we have more than 600 beverage options, and 180 of those are low and no calorie. And we put those calories right on the front so you'll know whether they're full calorie or they're low and no calorie. We provide transparent information on our labels, and starting in the US, and you'll see in this upper image of the beverage vending machines, we're now putting the calories on the actuals. You press the button and you go to put your finger on it, you see the number of calories, and you make the choice. Do I want the 140 from a regular Coke? Do I want the 0 from a Coke Zero or a Diet Coke? You make that choice because you know what's right for you at that moment. We have nutrition education materials on our websites, and we sponsor programs all over the world, more than 200 of them. So this entire country is under pressure. We're under pressure as companies, we're under pressure as a civil society to do something about obesity. And if we work together honestly and collaboratively, businesses, government, teachers, scientists, we can make a change. Coca-Cola is a big company, and we're a big part of communities. And like everyone, we have a vested interest in the health of this country. And we truly want to work with everyone as our partner. So nutrition labeling is a key in this effort. 3 principles we believe should guide this effort. And I thank you for inviting me here to share these views. Look forward to the dialogue.
No, I have to ask, since this is just such an interesting panel, and I think you all agree, different perspectives and also convergence at the same time. And just jumping off from where Michael Jacobson left off, and I think we could all agree that more information is not necessarily better information, but how would each of us come down on Helen's concept? And I think it's an interesting one. We've put a lot of education into people understanding that calories matter. People know what calories are. I don't honestly know how much potassium I need, but I know how many calories I shouldn't be eating. If we shifted the conversation about labels away from nutritional labeling and away from food safety issues to calories, would that be the most important next goal in labeling? Becky?
If we shifted it away
If
from
we
safety
shifted,
and
if there's,
to calories.
we have access to websites. We're in 2013. I can find out a lot on a website. when I go to the store, and whether I go with a little screaming kid, you know, who wants SpongeBob SquarePants in his cereal or not, if calories are our most, you know, it's just interesting for me, and I don't want to give a whole conversation on this because that's not my role, but we started thinking about how food labeling came to be, and it was interesting to hear that it came really out of a, makes sense, a food safety issue. Mm-hmm. It's morphing. Has it morphed again? So the most important thing about food labeling perhaps isn't the breakdown of nutrients, but is the breakdown of calories? Please.
Sure, I mean, I've never thought of it that way. I think that, I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, but my understanding is that calories are definitely important, especially insofar as obesity is the concern. And so I think, you know, there's value to prominent calorie labeling probably. But I definitely don't see a need to make that the primary overriding purpose of the label. I mean, I think background to sort of an undercurrent of a lot of the discussion is sort of front of pack versus back of pack, and then maybe also adding to that maybe information that's nowhere on the package but is online, that sort of thing. So I think, you know, in a conversation about what really deserves to be singled out and go on the front of the package, you know, I haven't given a lot of thought. If you're going to single one thing out, calories seems like a fairly important thing, but I don't think it makes sense to view it as the overwhelming goal of the label.
Jennifer?
Well, no, I don't agree. I actually think that would be a great step backwards. I really agreed with Helen that education would be great in schools, that it would be a terrific place to start with young children to give them some nutrition education. That would help, and give them education on reading the nutrition facts panel, so we're not worried about people not being able to understand it. But calories are for sure not a great indicator of health. Nuts are more calories than potato chips, yet we wouldn't tell people to eat nuts. If you walk into a Wendy's and look at the menu board, the Frosty is less calories than all of the salads, yet we wouldn't tell them to eat Frosty. So let's not think about food in terms of calories, because that doesn't have anything to do with nutrition. And also, if you just saw the Mediterranean diet study that came out last week, what were the people that were the most healthiest were eating higher calorie diets, just they were eating healthy fat. So let's move away from this calorie discussion. It's old science, as is the total fat concept, and let's move to the real nutrients that are matter and the things that are problematic, which we are now seeing is added sugar. So I'm not going to say what should be on the front or not be on, but certainly calories is not the answer.
I certainly didn't mean to imply that calories would be the only nutrient on the label. When it comes to obesity, calories are the issue. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. When it comes to weight management, when it comes to good health, we need a lot of nutrients, and that nutrition facts panel, or whatever it's called in the new era, needs to be there. But let's not try to put a nutrition text in everything we know about this food product. Let's keep it simple. Perhaps it is the protein, it's the fat, it's the saturated fat, the sugars. If added sugars are to be considered, we've got to have a very robust debate and look at all of the science. And it's been looked at already by a number of committees. It's been looked at by the European Food Safety Authority. It's been looked at back in '93. It was looked at in the IOM front of pack labeling report. We've got to look at it and come to a consensus. Does it belong on the label or doesn't it belong? And what we look at it from the Coca-Cola standpoint and from many of the industry standpoint, when it comes to sugar, it's about the calories. And if you're consuming too many calories because you're eating too much sugar or too much protein or too much carbohydrates of other types, you are going to gain weight. So we need to have a look at what's going to be there.
I just want to note, I'm glad you brought up the 1993, because actually when the Nutrition Facts Panel was being debated, back in those days when they gave GRAS status to added sugar, actually I don't remember the year, but this is what was in the minds of the people creating the Nutrition Facts Panel. People were eating 50 grams of added sugar, and now we're at much higher rates. So we do need to relook at what's going on with added sugar intake. It's exponentially higher than it was when the original determinations were made. So it is time to revisit it, for sure.
And I can be the boring government lawyer and say that GRAS status is generally recognized as safe status
Sorry.
means that it doesn't have to go through the food additive petition process.
Sorry.
It can just be put in the food.
Right, and so people were eating much less when the government determined it was safe, and also the government said if people eat much more, it should be relooked at. So that is a great thing to relook at.
Can I add something?
I agree with Jennifer here. What she's saying, it's the less and the more. It's not the what. It's the how and how much. If I am having, I love creme brulee. And when I have creme brulee, I don't want it made with sugar substitutes and skim milk. I want the really good stuff. But if I do this every night, I've got a problem, even if I'm eating out every night. So it's the how and how much with the sugars, with the protein, with the fat, with everything. And that's what we've got, this message we've got to get. I say let's start at prenatal visits. Let's work with everyone in society on education and then work it through our school systems.
Let's open it up. Was I cutting you off before you had something to say, Debbie? No, let's open it up. Last questions from the floor. Let's start right in the back.
My name's Sarah, and I'm a registered cardiovascular nurse. I'm actually a nurse practitioner program at Georgetown, and I agree partially, but I think that the issue of type and the conundrum you get into when you just list calories is then you get into the artificial sweeteners, and I think that's a whole nother problem altogether. And I know there's differing reports on that, but scientifically, but emerging studies are showing detrimental effects of that. And so if people see the lower calories, then they're going to choose that. But it's deceiving because it has other health ramifications. I don't know if anybody-
Did people understand that question? Comment.
I mean, I guess Helen spoke to the lower calories being the better choice, and I don't know if that was my take on what she said, but I don't know. If that's what
Managing your
she was
calories is a better choice, and figuring out how many calories are right for me, for you, based on physical activity and our age. Managing your calories is what's important. I'm not always going to make the lower calorie choice, but I'm going to think about that choice in terms of my total day and in terms of my total activity level. So no way did I want to imply that lower calorie is also always best. In fact, you probably end up with an unhealthy diet. Now, in terms of the non-nutritive sweeteners, the low and no calorie sweeteners, there's lots of names used. They are all thoroughly studied, thoroughly vetted through FDA. The studies continue, they're constant. We would not put an ingredient in a food product if it were unsafe. And I think that's enough said. We can all debate and discuss the science, and we'd be glad to do that separately.
Michael Roberts, and I spoke first today. There's emerging studies that I think are far from being conclusive that look at the whether sugar is addictive or not. And if the science bears out that sugar is addictive, what would be the legal implications with respect to labeling, in your view, with that kind of finding?
Could I ask a follow-up? Because I was interested when you mentioned that before. I guess the question is exactly how they're defining addictive, like habit forming. It's an interesting question because, I mean, food is always something that you need to eat, but of course, if an individual ingredient is habit forming, is that how they're defining it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the scientist with whom you're speaking. The reaction in media has gone all the way from we need to regulate sugar if it is addictive, like we regulate alcohol, to the other spectrum. We need to at least make a notice or make that on a notification on a label in terms of a warning or some affirmative statement.
Yeah, I mean.
But obviously, I think the science still needs to be developed in this area, but I just was curious as to your thoughts as to legal implications given where the science is moving.
Yeah, I mean, my off-the-cuff reaction is it still comes back to the question of what are the underlying health concerns about the ingredient, right? Because alcohol addiction is a problem because consuming alcohol can be bad for your health. If it turns out that broccoli is addictive, that's probably fine, right? So it seems to me that the legal implications would have to tie into that analysis. We'd still sort of be coming back to the same question, but it would be an interesting twist on that question.
And also, we have other products, like caffeine, as we all know, is habit forming or dependence, whatever the word is, but we don't actually require caffeine to be labeled on beverages or conventional food, only on no-dose and no-dose, maybe that's it.
Dietary supplements,
Dietary
but if it's part of a
supplements.
proprietary blend, you don't need
Then you don't have to tell how much. So we should probably start disclosing the amount of the addictive substance. But again, everything else, like alcohol, doesn't say it's addictive on the label. It just tells you the birth defect warning. I think it would be a field day for plaintiffs' lawyers.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to tackle this from the legal side, but I will say that pick up any Coca-Cola product that contains caffeine, and we label that caffeine on there. We've done this for many, many years, and we do it outside of the United States wherever it's allowed.
Is it not allowed?
Way in the back, sir.
Hi, my name is Adam Solomon. I'm attending the LLM program in Ag and Food Law in Arkansas. I have a question for Becky about nanomaterials. The EU just required that any food product that has nano to have the 4 letters beside it, nano, in between brackets. And the FDA has been had a certain approach, and it seems that the FDA is changing its approach right now by asking the industry and inquiring about the status and more details and risk analysis, etc. So what's the update? Are we is the FDA changing and recognizing that it's different than regular material? And also to Helen, I'm wondering if Coca-Cola does use any nanomaterials out there. Thank you.
Right, so I can't provide any update beyond whatever the agency has said publicly, but I will maybe explain a little bit what the topic is for those who aren't familiar with it. I mean, nano refers to extremely small things, right, at the nanoscale. And increasingly ingredients, and it's not just in the food world, it's in the drug world and the artificial coloring, you know, a lot of areas that FDA regulates, and I'm sure other areas as well. Scientists are increasingly making things at that utilize nanotechnology, where they manipulate things at that very small scale. It's hard even to define, because it's always the case, even with conventional or more old-fashioned forms of manufacturing, that you might have things at that size. But a lot more is being done at that scale, and I think my understanding, for example, is that the food industry is trying to achieve certain technical results by doing things at that scale. So I think, you know, like that you might be able to get something that would have more flavor punch for the amount of whatever that it has in it. You know, for example, salt, I don't know if that's actually happening or not, but that's the sort of theoretical thing that could be happening, where because it's so tiny, it penetrates the tongue faster or something like that. Is that right? And, you know, but at the same time, something might get absorbed into your system differently. And like I said, it's a concern with, I think, with medical devices and stuff too. If it's that small, it might affect the body in a different way. So that's the best I can do. I can't actually answer, but I can provide that context.
And in terms of does Coca-Cola use nano ingredients, I can't answer that question. I'm not an R&D person. What I can answer is I know how much of a commitment we place on safety. We use the expression we'd fall on the sword for safety. We do not ever compromise our ingredients, our products, or our consumers.
It's just fascinating. Lady in the back, purple sweater.
I'm not sure if this is on. Oh, it is. I'm Sue Borchard. I'm from the Harvard School of Education across the street. And I've been sort of following the debate on high fructose corn syrup for a while, just trying to understand it, because I hear a lot of experts debate whether there is a health issue and whether it is just a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, and is a sugar a sugar a sugar. And as near as I can tell, there is a temporal aspect to the ingestion of high fructose corn syrup that doesn't exist when the sugar is in combination with protein or fiber. And so that is something I'd really like to see what our panelists have to say in terms of, you know, how would a label ever address something like this in terms of if the real health issue and the real danger is the speed with which your liver must metabolize a large amount of sugar you can't get in any other way, how does the calorie content even begin to address that health danger?
I'm not sure that the food label is the space for that, to be honest. I mean, it seems like it might be part of a safety assessment, which happens in a couple different ways, as we've alluded to. Off the top of my head, I don't have any great ideas for that one.
And you're right, Becky. This comes back to safety, and we do not use ingredients that are unsafe. We cannot. The debates.
High fructose corn syrup.
Yes, absolutely. We use high fructose corn syrup, and it's used widely in the United States and in other countries around the world. And you know, it's the same calories, virtually 4 calories per gram. It's about the same sweetening, and it's a useful ingredient. And we label it as that, high fructose corn syrup, on our labels. It's clear.
Jennifer, I feel that you have a comment.
Well, yeah, we're not scientists, but I have to agree with that it's not the place on the panel. But actually, just to correct it, high fructose corn syrup is sweeter than sugar.
Could you expand on that just a little bit?
There's a sweetness. Sucrose is actually the 100 when you go through sweetness, and I barely can do science, but I know that high fructose corn syrup 55 is sweeter than high fructose corn syrup 45, and then that's sweeter than sucrose, and below that would be lactose.
Yeah, we're getting into a debate here that I think goes beyond the topic that's at hand. Perhaps for another.
Yeah.
I was just
another
wanted
group
to
of
correct
sensory
it
experts.
in case somebody was writing notes.
I have a over question. Where does behavioral science fit into all of this? I mean, the title of the panel is an ideal label. We've all agreed that more is not necessarily more. What are the testing, and I'm very provoked by Helen's commitment, everybody's commitment, that we all need to be on the same path. So where does the consumer and the behavioral science come in for constructing a label that actually works, that has enough information to provide a useful guide and is not so market-driven that it is, that we haven't gotten to that point where we're all working together?
I mean, one thing I can say quickly that might surprise people, or maybe not, but it actually figures heavily into the First Amendment analysis, the way that the courts are currently applying the First Amendment law.
Can you talk about that? Because I don't know that.
Right. So, for example, a government restriction of speech would be analyzed under Central Hudson. So if the government wants to not let a company say whatever they want to say on their label, and the court was analyzing whether or not it was permissible for the government to stop them. The first step is, because it's commercial speech, not political speech, it has to concern lawful activity and not be inherently misleading in order to even get First Amendment protection. Otherwise, it doesn't get First Amendment protection, and that opens a whole interesting can of worms about whether something's, so basically it has to be true. And not inherently misleading. A lot of the health claims and stuff, the question is whether or not it's true. So that's interesting, but that's separate. If it does get First Amendment protection, then you go on to the government stating what their asserted interest is. The government has to have a substantial interest in taking that information off the label, or in some situations, you might apply this test when the government wants to put information on a label, depending on what the courts choose to do. But the government has to have a substantial interest. And so the government interest might have something to do with, making things clear to consumers. The government wants to take, if government wanted to stop a company from saying GMO free because they thought it was misleading, because GMO stands for genetically modified organism, and it's a type of product that never contains organisms. So it's misleading to say it's GMO free because it implies that you might expect an organism to be in it. If government wanted to do something like that, they would have to have a substantial interest. Why do they care so much? And then The next step is, does the regulation directly advance the asserted interest? So in figuring out if the regulation advanced that interest, the courts increasingly are really looking for consumer research. So in that example, did consumers really think that GMO-free meant whatever it was the government was so worried about, right? Did they really think, in the case of RBST-free labeling on milk, if the government was concerned that consumers might think that there was some kind of compositional difference between milk from cows that had been treated with RBST as compared to milk from cows that had not been treated with RBST, if that's the reason why the government went after some company that labeled their milk RBST-free, the courts would say, what's your basis, government, for thinking that that's even a problem, or for thinking that your solution's going to help? And, where are the studies showing that consumers actually are misled in that way? One thing to note in this realm is that just because consumers want a certain kind of information, at least one circuit has held that that's not reason enough for government to act. That's kind of a separate issue, but it's worth raising. But anyway, that's so. And then the last step is whether or not there has to be a good fit between what the government did and the goal it was trying to achieve. But it's at that third step that the courts are really increasingly looking for studies. In some of the cases, like the tobacco case I mentioned recently, to an amazing degree, to a point where it's hard to imagine how the social science could possibly keep pace with what the courts are expecting. I'm just speaking for myself here, but hard for me to imagine.
No, that was perfectly put. And we at the Red Center actually do strategic science, and one of our former colleagues who's now here at Harvard is actually have a panel tomorrow, Christine Roberto's panel. They are behavioral scientists, is that? And so I think that would be a great panel to learn more about that. But that's the type of research I rely on to make my arguments.
Just like to add to this, the nutrition label is a tool. It's not going to make the difference ultimately. It's one of the things, one of many things. Whether we have nutrition labels, we have more sidewalks, we have a wider array of food available for consumers to make the choices that are right for them. So we have all these tools and we have all these tactics and we have all these programs, but motivating the consumer to make the change, to make the choices that will be right for their weight and right for their health, that's what behavior's about. So I'm a pretty pragmatic person when it comes to this. And I think, how do we get there? We can write books and we can have courses, but why not have 30-second spots on the radio? Why don't we have billboards that have a message that I see maybe every day and it changes? The messages aren't changing constantly, but they're consistent messages that will help me learn how I can use all these tools to be a healthier person. We're not going to change the health of this country by changing the nutrition label, but that's one very important step that we can take.
That would be great. Could you suggest for Coca-Cola to pay for those billboards? That would be a great solution. The government doesn't have that much money.
I know the government, and actually we do a tremendous amount of support, not just what we do. And let me tell you, putting these calorie labels, I have a wonderful slide that shows the world map and shows just some of these images. And I feel so proud of our people. That cost us a lot of money. But we give a lot of money to campaigns, and then we let them run with it in terms of the Boys and Girls Club here in the United States in Triple Play. And we have support for Exercises Medicine and the Heart Truth. And all of these are ways that we can get these messages out. So yeah, the food industry can help with the money. We don't have a lot of it, but we can help supporting these campaigns if you don't shut us out of the dialogue. And thank you for having me here today.
I can't say enough about how important it is to have the dialogue. We're getting close to the end of time. I'd like to take a couple more questions, and then I'm going to hope that the speakers, except for the speaker who has to get on a plane right away, will stay around and continue the conversation. You, sir.
Thank you. I'm Laurent Adamowicz, Harvard Advanced Leadership Fellow, also the CEO and founder of Bonap, trying to help people eat better and figure out what's in their food. I've created 4,000 of these labels in my 15 years in the food industry, and I upload all the initiatives today both from the government voice, even though it's not the official government we're hearing, the Consumer Association and the industry, and all our great panelists, and thank you so much. I have a simple question that goes back to food labeling. I mean, we've been now 20 years with regulation that tells us what's in our food, and yet we, the people, we, the consumers, do not understand those labels. Is there any serious initiative on either side of the aisle or somewhere in the middle with the Consumers Association, and we've heard Michael and others, to help that happen, where we would have size that reflects the actual serving size, so that my jeans have gotten bigger over the years, your dresses I'm sure too, even though they share the same number, because the industry reflects the trend that, hey, we have an epidemic in this country. It's obesity, and people are getting not just bigger, but they're getting sicker. So, is there any initiative to have that change, and change rapidly, but also with a language that the consumer would understand on the front of the package, not the nutrition facts, but something that would say how much sugar, how much salt, how much bad fat there is in this box or in this can? Thank you.
I'm going to share our experience in trying to get real with what the consumer is eating so that we understand where the calories are. And if you look up at that Coca-Cola can, I wish I had also had a 20 fluid ounce bottle or a 2-liter bottle. But working through, this is called Clear on Calories through the American Beverage Association, and several companies came together and we said, look, the rack, the reference amount commonly consumed, that's what we call the serving size, it's 8 fluid ounces. That's what the government requires us to put. That was 1993. Well, when we open that 20 fluid ounce bottle, that's what we drink. And if we open that 12 ounce can, that's what we drink. And how many of us have an 8 fluid ounce glass in our cupboards at home? We don't. So we went to FDA and we said, let's get real. Let's put the amount that consumers are normally drinking. Not what they should drink, but right now we've got to inform. What are you normally drinking? And it's usually that 12 fluid ounce can. So where you're really seeing a big difference is when you pick up, if you pick up a 2-liter bottle of soda now, instead of an 8 fluid ounce serving, you're seeing it's a 12 fluid ounce serving, because that's what the researchers showed they're consuming. If you pick up a 20 fluid ounce bottle of Coca-Cola, you are seeing right on the front 240 calories, instead of following the regulation that says that you're labeling by 8 fluid ounces and you've got 2.5 servings in the bottle. So taking those steps forward to label based on the full container or on larger serving sizes, if this is what people are consuming, begins to help understand how many calories you're really taking in. And then the other side of it is, how can we graphically help people to understand what is a more reasonable serving size? And that's one of the reasons that we've introduced the mini cans. And those are very, very popular because you can have that taste that you like, but a much more reduced calorie load.
I think I need to wrap up, or can I take one more question? Okay. Emily.
Hello, my name's Emily Broadleave, and I work here, direct the Food Law and Policy Clinic. So I want to thank all of you for being here. This was a really great panel. I think just hopefully this is a good wrap up, but I think again we're trying to figure out what can be changed, and again coming from sort of a policy perspective. So I think it would be really helpful maybe if you could say kind of in one sentence or one thing that you would love to see changed on the nutrition labeling. And we heard about a bunch of things, but if you could change one thing in the policy or the law the way that it is right now, that would really make it easier for people to know what they're eating, and if they want to eat something healthy, actually be finding those healthy things. I know it's really tough because, as we've heard from all the speakers, there are a lot of things that are maybe worth changing, but what would be your top kind of priority if you could get one thing changed out? And Becky, I know it's tough for you, but in your personal capacity, maybe one thing that you think could really make a difference.
Even in my personal capacity, I'm going to pass, but good try.
I guess it would be to have added sugar in the disqualifying nutrient list, but apply that to nutrient content claims too. So that would be mine.
I would make the labeling of calories on the back of the pack much more prominent, like Michael showed in his slide. And I would like to see at least a strong government support, and actually we felt that support for front of pack calorie labeling. That's not the only thing, but that's a big part of helping to change this obesity trend that we're in.
Well, I think I have to wrap up, but I want to thank the panel, which has been an amazingly energetic panel at the end of a long, snowy, cold day. And the audience, and also the Harvard Law School students, and the edifice, and also AWA, which support made it invaluable for us all to be here today. And I think we're going to take a break now. We taking a break?
Taking a light or short break. Till 6:30, those receptions, refreshments out in the lobby, wine included.
And then we're going to come back for Rashi Rangan, who's going to give a keynote.
I should. Let me give you my card. Thank you.